Number one is you should always bet on yourself. And number two, you should always bet on some sort of emerging technology. What do you think the next emerging technology is going to be? Go out and learn it, become the go-to person for that, establish your expertise so that when people are looking at how they think about technology, that they'll come to you and ask you questions. And it really helps you establish credibility in that space.
Jay is the CTO of cloud computing at Akamai.
Agentic AI is an AI which can actually utilize multiple models and also deterministic things. So for example, I might say, oh, can you pay my bills every month? Agentic AI will put together a plan of services on what it takes to pay your bill every month. Perhaps electricity provider isn't digitized, right? So maybe it has to download a PDF, maybe it has to do some recognition on that PDF, figure out where the total is on that and what's owed, then move from this non-deterministic model, which is AI, to a more deterministic one. And I think that sometimes we forget about the efficiencies that can drive out of this. So as people kept chasing sort of these bigger and bigger farms of GPUs in order to train these larger and larger models, DeepSeek comes along and says, you know what, you can actually do the same thing and have just as a performant a model with much less compute. And that applies, again, not just to large language models, it applies to everything. And I think that what we're going to see through the rest of this year and probably over the next couple of years is people chasing efficiency. For me, it's certainly the capability to learn and relearn. If I am looking to hire somebody and evaluating them, I want to make sure that they don't have a fixed mindset. Make sure that they really have this growth mindset of, instead of I don't know that, it's I don't know that yet, right? And have this capability then to sort of go and learn it. It's always better to ask the right question than to have the right answer. It's always more valuable because asking the right question, gets you closer to the root of the problem.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the CTO Show hosted by Tech5. I'm your host Philip, and we're in Singapore sitting down with Jay. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Great, thank you, Philip. I'm glad to be here.
Jay is the CTO of cloud computing at Akamai. But I think before Akamai, Jay, you have quite an interesting and multifaceted career with some detours as well. So we'd love to learn a little bit more about your background first, and then maybe we can dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always interesting when you look back and sort of see how you arrived at a place. You look at sort of the luck that you've had, the decisions that you've made, and the opportunities as well. If I look back at my career, I went to university actually first for computer engineering, electrical type of engineering, not really software development at all, but really focusing on the hardware. And at the time, there were a lot of dot-coms, and there was an opportunity at dot-com, and actually did not finish my undergrad degree. I actually went directly to work for this dot-com, doing, first of all, technical support, then quality assurance. From there, that company got acquired twice over. And then I went to New York City. I worked for a software company there for a couple of years, and then went into IT consulting. IT consulting was a great space to learn about different technologies and different things and about different businesses. I was doing work with public sector, doing work with financial services. And then an opportunity arose to go work in Australia for a couple of years. So New York to Australia. It was supposed to be a couple of years. I ended up staying in Australia for 7 years. I left that company and then went to work for a very small consulting company where I was a junior partner. After a few years, that company then got acquired. And then I was sort of thinking about what it was that I wanted to do next. The company that acquired us gave me an opportunity to go and work in our Vietnam office running our offshore development center, which I took up. Originally, I wanted to come directly to Singapore and open up a new office here, but they said no. We already have this business in Vietnam. If you could help run that, that would be great. But at the same time, I was sort of thinking about what is it that I wanted to do next. And I took that opportunity to invest in myself and go get an MBA. I went and got my MBA with the University of Chicago. They had a global program that was based out of Singapore. So once every 5 weeks, I would fly to Singapore, take classes there, and then go back to Vietnam. After I finished my MBA and finished my earnout from the acquisition, I was really looking for sort of what I wanted to do next. And, you know, the way the earnout worked is, right at the end of my earnout, I didn't have a job anymore, right? So Singapore, you have 30 days to leave. But I sponsored myself, was able to get what they call a PEP, a personalized employment pass here in Singapore, and it gave me a little bit of flexibility to sort of look around. And I decided, cloud computing should be my focus. And I interviewed at Amazon and I interviewed at Google. I ended up taking a role at Google. I worked at Google then for 9 years as part of Google Cloud. At the end of my career, at Google. I was leading technology strategy and evangelism for Asia Pacific at Google. I joined ByteDance then for about 8 months. And I'm sure you have questions about why it was only 8 months. And then I joined the company I'm with now, Akamai. And when I first joined Akamai, I actually didn't know sort of why they would want me to work for them. They definitely wanted somebody based in Asia and the Asia Pacific for this role, for the CTO for cloud computing. But they were primarily known as sort of a CDN and security company, and not so much known for a cloud company. But they had made a recent acquisition, and I found the vision that they had for cloud computing very compelling.
Wow, I think there's a lot that we could dive into, but I think maybe just to kind of go on the high level, I would love to learn a little bit more about, you seem to have made a lot of different decisions on both location, different roles, different opportunities from big and small. Were there any kind of unifying themes that prompted you to take the next leap of faith? And how did you make these kind of career decisions as a whole?
Yeah, look, when you're making these kinds of decisions, you definitely should look at what you want to do, where you want your focus to be. Number one is you should always bet on yourself. And number two, you should always bet on, especially in the technology field, some sort of emerging technology. What do you think the next emerging technology is going to be? Go out and learn it, become the go-to person for that, establish your expertise so that when people need advice, when people are looking at how they think about technology, that they'll come to you and ask you questions. And it really helps you establish credibility in that space. So each time I made a decision, it was primarily based around that. Sort of like, what are the opportunities available to me? What are the options available to me if I were to make this choice? And of course, you do want to think about things like your own personal risk. Is this something that might not work out? And what's the danger to me? I think when you're young, it's certainly easier to make a lot of those choices because, the downsides are somewhat more recoverable. But I do think it's important to take those risks early on to sort of get ahead and establish yourself. And that's how I've tried to make my decisions. In addition to that, you really want to make sure you're choosing an environment that allows you to grow as well. I think, so whenever I worked at Google, I had the opportunity to help design one of the offices. And one of the designers, said that a person's behavior is a function of the person and their environment. And I think sometimes people, even in a work type situation, forget about how the environment plays into what you do, how you behave, how you act, and the opportunities that are available to you.
And when you say environment, do you mean the other people who are surrounding you?
Exactly, right? So in a design sense, they're focused on the physical environment, but I think that everybody needs to think about the environment as a whole, right? Sort of the people that you're working with, the customers that you're working with, even the physical environment as well, the types of tools and technology that they're using to collaborate with each other as well.
Wow. And for you, the other interesting thing is I think you made a relatively bold, maybe leap to Australia and then to Vietnam relatively early in your career. Do you also recommend that other people pursue that kind of location diversity as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, so when I was growing up as a kid, my father was in the Air Force in the US, so I moved around a lot anyway. And I always found it valuable to sort of have that exposure to diverse people and diverse cultures as well. And I do think that's important, right? There's no greater way to sort of expose yourself to new ideas than through the ideas of other people. And being able to travel, being able to work in different locations, work in different types of organizations, which is why I think consulting was so important, because I was working in different industries and had the opportunity to work with different types of technologies as well. Having that sort of exposure, having that sort of diversity in sort of like, I guess, I don't like to think of myself as an AI model, but if I were to, it's the more data you have, the better your model can be. Right. So if you have more data, if you have more diverse types of data, the better your overall model is going to be.
That's amazing. And I guess this takes us to your present role, which is at Akamai. For those of us who don't know too much about Akamai, do you mind giving us a little bit more context about the company?
Sure. So Akamai was founded at MIT in the US by one of the professors and one of the students. So Tom Layton and Danny Lewin being the student. They essentially invented the CDN, the Content Delivery Network. So when things are cached at the edge, so I don't know if people remember sort of like what the first version of the web was like. We used to have to wait to download things so much. And it was because a lot of this content would be in centralized servers or in someone's data center at their location or office. And a CDN allowed them to take that content and get it closer to where their users are. So through Akamai and their technology, they were able to distribute these things like directly into telcos and internet service providers. So whenever you're downloading something, it's coming from the telco, not from the centralized server. So they invented that 25 years ago. They were founded 1 week before Google was founded. And since then have been purely focused on CDN, and about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, actually branched into security as well. Because if you think about sort of edge capabilities and caching, well, then how do you secure that? And how do you look at things like web application firewalls? Again, you could host all those things centrally, but it doesn't really allow you to scale or be resilient at a global level. So being able to push those sorts of technologies out to the edges also provides a lot of functionality. And then about 3 years ago, so 1 year before I joined Akamai, they acquired a company called Linode, which is considered an alternative cloud. And this was sort of Akamai's first step into cloud technologies. And now as we look forward, we're really thinking about how do we take not just content and not just security, but how do we take compute and get that closer to the user?
Wow. Sounds like Akamai actually now covers a lot of bases, but I guess to give the viewers a sense of maybe Akamai's impact, do you mind talking a little bit more about how geographically distributed and how, the customers actually are like for Akamai?
Yeah, absolutely. So, over the past 25 years, Akamai has created essentially the world's largest distributed computing network. So they have 4,300 edge locations, so points of presence around the world, 175 cities, and it's a massive undertaking. It's about 8 times larger than any network in the world.
Wow.
And so, as we're thinking about it again, looking at how can we use that not just for content, but for the next step in distributed architectures, architectures that are going to support things like VR, AR, architectures that are going to support things like edge-based AI as well.
Why is distributed computing more and more important right now?
Yeah, for a number of reasons. If we take a look at sort of how cloud has evolved over time, whenever cloud was first launched, it was really about sort of lifting and shifting current applications and not really changing the architectures at all. So they would just very quickly get these things into the cloud because there was this expectation of cost savings, much of which has not been realized. But what has been realized is the ability to horizontally scale these applications in an OpEx fashion as opposed to investing in a lot of infrastructure, right? So they can spin these things up, they can shut them down at will. And for those organizations which have highly variable or volatile workloads, they have realized savings. But again, it's not for all workloads today. But as they've created these architectures for horizontal scaling, they're starting to use more things like Kubernetes and microservices. And that gives us a capability now to think about architectures in a very different way. Because now you can take these services, these microservices, and distribute them anywhere in the world as long as you have the networking to support it. And what does that mean for an end user? Well, it means if I, as a user, am interacting with something like a video game, as an example, and I use gaming as an example because latency is extremely important for video games. All of a sudden, I can have single-digit latency to an endpoint as opposed to having 100 milliseconds to where a centralized server might be. Right, and that's a massive difference in a gaming experience. Now, if I were to take that and think about how the world is changing and adopting, customer experience is extremely important. So we're seeing a lot of this in retail now. Content is getting more interactive, so not just video games, but all content is getting more interactive, which means it's no longer sort of me just requesting a page and getting a page of information, where something like a CDN would be important. It's now about me interacting with these applications. And if I'm interacting, then it's two-way communication. And the faster I can get a response, the better my overall experience is going to be. Now, humans, we're quite tolerant of things like 100 milliseconds, again, unless it's something like gaming. But if it's something like VR, AR, you can't have streaming at 100 milliseconds. You're going to get motion sickness because it's not going to be able to keep up. Right. So you need sort of under 20 milliseconds in order to have like a smooth experience without getting motion sickness. And then if you look at things like autonomous vehicles or IoT, these things are not as tolerant as human beings when it comes to latency, right? So being able to have different points of aggregation, I'm not saying you won't need compute inside the car, but the car can make certain decisions based on information. But if it can make decisions based on information that is aggregated at a city level, as an example, it's going to make much better decisions, right? Because now it has more data to make those decisions with. Same thing with IoT, supply chains, same thing with agentic AI as well.
And that's probably the big topic that we'll try to talk about later. But I'm just curious, right now, do you see this almost like exponentially declining results when it comes to latency? Or is this also, kind of plateauing as we're limited by maybe compute or other technology?
Yeah, it's certainly, how I like to talk to people that are investigating in this space is we tend to architect things based on certain constraints. And what we need to do whenever we're building anything new is not think about what's possible today. We need to think about what might be possible. And therefore, it helps us remove some of those constraints. So if I'm building an application, I might think to myself, well, all these things have to be centralized because all these services need to talk to each other. But then you also need to think about sort of where your customer is. And the customer could also be a device, right, out on the edge. So is it plateauing from that standpoint? Yes, because I still see customers really focusing on that centralized architecture and trying to squeeze out, 5 or 6 milliseconds within that centralized architecture, whenever they could just take those services, move that to the edge and gain, 50, 60 milliseconds just by doing that. But they're really constrained by that level of thinking. So I believe that, as architectures change and as these services can be pushed out to the edge, which Akamai is really trying to champion in this space, that not only are we going to see things that we know to be true in terms of latency, and so things like retail and things like VR, AR, and things like IoT and autonomous vehicles and video gaming, but we're going to see brand new things appear, right? So whenever you sort of introduce technology, there's always sort of like this, this initial impact of the things that you knew were going to happen, but there's always this long tail of like really interesting things that you didn't know it was going to enable. And I think that's what we're going to see. Whereas people, instead of thinking like getting closer to the edge from centralized architecture, what if everything could just be running at the edge? What if we could look at edge as a way to be resilient, right? If I have 4,300 locations to actually run these services, now all of a sudden we have sort of a denial of service capability built in. We have resilience built in by having these things wherever it can be. It gives me flexibility in terms of being able to move these workloads wherever my user might be. So imagine like your own little personal cloud that follows you, right? So, you get on a plane here in Singapore, you fly to New York City, your little personal cloud can move with you to New York City because it has infrastructure there and the services in Singapore can spin down.
That's amazing. How much of this is a hardware constraint versus a software solution?
So most of it is now software constraints. The hardware and to be, if we look at sort of the hardware constraints, a lot of it has been taken over now by software-defined networks, as an example. Um, there are still some, and really this is still a software constraint more than a hardware constraint. There are some capabilities that are not as portable as they could be across different architectures, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of architectures assume that the underlying hardware is somewhat homogeneous, but that's not the world we live in today, and nor should it be.
Yeah.
I think as we move forward, we're going to see a lot of application-specific chips, and it's going to be up now to cloud providers to use software to move the workload to the processor or to the location which is best suited in order to execute that workload.
Got it. Got it. So still a lot of improvement on the software side.
Definitely.
Um, I think if we zoom out a little bit right now, there's obviously a lot of talk about AI and also this theme of digital sovereignty, especially where your data is stored, where things are processed, where models are from. For you, what's your rough kind of thesis about how does cloud computing and distributed computing affect this hot topic of conversation?
Yeah, well, certainly distributed computing is, I believe, a core enabler for something like digital sovereignty. So, I was at KubeCon in London just a few weeks ago, and it was a very big topic of conversation, right? Just with the geopolitics of the world at the moment, how does an organization stay resilient in times where pricing might change at the will of a political leader?
Yeah.
So how do we manage that? How do we make sure, so for EU specifically, how does EU make sure that if something happens that they have all the capabilities inside of EU to run and operate their government and commercial applications? So distributed plays a really big part in that, but probably more than that, things like application portability also plays a part in that, right? So portability is part of freedom, and that freedom gives you the capability to sort of choose where you might run a workload. In EU, and in this region, in Australia and Japan, companies have invested quite a bit in managed services. And managed services are great, right? They help you get started very quickly. It helps you minimize the skills required within your own team. And it really bootstraps your organization to get their applications to market as fast as possible. The downside of that is if you're using a managed service, your application is no longer portable, right? Or it's not as portable. So then, again, if something happens with that provider, you're somewhat locked in. Obviously you can export your data and import that someplace else, but there's a lot of work to rework your applications, to take a look at your operations as well, and what would that commercial model even look like, right? That also might be different. So you have to really examine that quite a bit. So really for digital sovereignty, portability is certainly key for that. But you really need to think about, and again, I'm not saying you don't use managed services, but you should really understand your exit strategy is for that and how you're going to operationally decouple from a single provider.
Do you think eventually the world will basically majorly shift towards less managed services because of this rift?
Yeah. I mean, I think that just like with a lot of other things, it will not necessarily move away from managed services, but you'll look at managed service providers rather than being locked into a particular architecture. So you can have somebody run your Kubernetes cluster as an example, and that could be managed by anybody, and it could be managed anywhere. And we are going to see certainly infrastructure in particular be turned into utility, right? Much like the early vision, right? That you should just be able to plug your application in just like an appliance into an outlet, and it should just run. And who cares who the electricity provider is? As long as the outlet is standardized, then you should be able to run that anywhere.
Got it. I also want to move towards maybe another topic of conversation right now, which is agentic AI. So can you talk a little bit more about how does your work affect maybe the development of agentic AI and what the implication is? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, so agentic AI is certainly the future of how AI is going to work to accomplish tasks. So agentic AI is I guess I'll explain it first. What agentic AI is for your listeners. Agentic AI is an AI which can actually utilize multiple models. And also deterministic things. So for example, I might say, can you pay my bills every month? Agentic AI will put together a plan of services on what it takes to pay your bill every month. Perhaps your electricity provider isn't digitized, right? So maybe it has to download a PDF, maybe it has to like do some recognition on that PDF, figure out where the total is on that and what's owed, and then it will just simply then move from this non-deterministic model, which is AI, to a more deterministic one. Okay, I now know how much is owed, and so I know that I can go and debit your account and credit the account of the provider in order to make that payment. Yeah. Right, so it's really sort of planning these things out from a deterministic standpoint. So how distributed computing plays into this is in a number of ways. One is it's certainly better to run these things where the users are, where the data is actually generated, rather than waiting for the data to be stored somewhere. And I think this is sort of like one of those fundamental constraints that needs to change, is people still think about running models where data is stored instead of where data is created. Mm-hmm. If you run it where it's created, then you have the ability to react in faster time, and you have the ability to filter and access data that might not be centralized, or maybe you don't even want to centralize it because of privacy concerns, as an example, or perhaps a governmental constraint. So you have access to data that you wouldn't otherwise if it was centralized. The other thing is agentic AI orchestrates different AIs, and much like a web proxy, which is better when it's run locally because otherwise it has to route everything through a central server. Agentic AI also works better if it's local because then it can actually aggregate the AI from a bunch of different points and bring it to you closer to where you are. Mm-hmm. And then finally, agentic AI isn't just for human interaction as well. Agentic AI will eventually also be for IoT types of interactions and agent-to-agent interactions as well.
Wow. So I guess for you guys at Akamai, do you feel like that this is something that you will try to invest in? And if so, like what are the different implications for maybe companies who are thinking about adapting to this phase, or the investments that they might want to make in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just like any other cloud provider, Akamai does have like a number of GPUs available for people who might want to train models. But that is not going to be where our focus is. I mean, if you take a look at customers and where future implementation is going to be, it's really going to be focused on the inference side. So, a lot of analysts claim that sort of 80 to 90% of future spend will be on the inference side, not on the training side. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, there are only going to be a few large companies that are going to have sort of like these large language models, right? If you take a look at the cost of what it takes to train like ChatGPT-4, so the CEO said, that it cost him $100 million. Llama 3, I think the estimates are $500 million. Like, not every company is going to build their own large language model. So there are only going to be a few providers of these large language models. However, there is room for specific fine-tuning and for small language models as well. And that's where we feel the training side is going to sit with us. That's all we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus on these large banks of GPUs and be in that market. So if we take a look at the other side, the inference side, that is where we're going to focus things. Mm-hmm. So things like agentic AI, absolutely. So we're going to look at specialized models like MCP, which can help us maintain the context and be sort of that agentic provider or agentic edge for those AI capabilities. Mm-hmm. But we're also going to look at more, it's strange to call any AI traditional AI, but there's a lot of traditional AI out there, right? Recommendation engines, image generation, those sorts of things. All of those things do not require, as much compute as a large language model either. And you can also start to look at things like specialized chips for inference as well, which helps reduce the overall cost. It helps reduce the overall carbon emissions, and helps make a more efficient and highly performant model for things like inference. So if we can focus on inference, I think that customers who also focus on inference can actually do so at a very low cost and make that extremely efficient.
This episode is brought to you by TechVibe, your one-stop IT recruitment solution provider. We connect global companies with top tech talent across Southeast Asia. Whether you're looking for permanent hires, short-term contractors, or employer of record, EOR services, we've got you covered, especially in the IT and digital sectors. Thanks for tuning in. And now, enjoy the episode.
I guess there's definitely a lot of opportunities in this AI stack, given that things are changing really, really fast. But maybe for companies that may be smaller or startups or those kind of things, where do you think the biggest opportunities are?
So the biggest opportunities are honestly just taking a look at the models that are freely available and using them, and also making sure that you keep up with the things that are impacting AI in a big way and why it's impacting in a big way. So DeepSeek, I think, is one of those huge impacts. Maybe it's not important for you today to use a large language model, but what is important for you to understand the impact that DeepSeek had and why.
Yeah.
Like, why was DeepSeek, such a huge impact to the market? Why did it force NVIDIA's stock to drop? And it's mainly because here was a model which did not require as much compute as required. However, the performance of that model is just as good as these other models, which cost a lot to train. And I think that sometimes we forget about the efficiencies that can drive out of this. So as people kept chasing sort of like these bigger and bigger farms of GPUs in order to train these larger and larger models, DeepSeek comes along and says, you know what, you can actually do the same thing and have just as a performant model with much less compute.
Yeah.
And that applies, again, not just to large language models, it applies to everything. And I think that, what we're going to see through the rest of this year and probably over the next couple of years is people chasing, efficiency. So I know this is valuable for my organization. I know that AI is valuable, but I can do so at a low cost, right? So I keep my R&D costs low, and especially if I'm using models that are more traditional types of AI models, those are well-known spaces. And if I keep up with the technology, I can implement those models very efficiently and at a very low cost.
Do you think that model performance will plateau even if, let's say, we get bigger and bigger? Or do you think it's...
Yeah, right. That's a hard prediction to make. I mean, obviously there are these leaps and, there's always sort of like these stepwise events that happen with AI where people think, the term for like the long period of time where AI wasn't doing anything, the AI winter, and there's always the prediction of another AI winter. But then something comes along and sort of like pushes things. Early days of AI, then you have things like back propagation, which helps you provide better weightings on your model, really pushed AI forward. Google's work on the transformer model, which is sort of the basis for all LLMs. Things like that really push these things forward. And there will always be those things. And for DeepSeek, right, in terms of being able to do so, to create these models very efficiently. So I think there are always going to be these things that sort of stepwise increase things. Obviously, we can only train on so much data. There's only so much data and so many parameters we can start creating around this data. Certainly that will always be important, but the underlying architecture of those models is going to constantly change and continue to drive efficiency.
Of course, yeah. And I think recently even there's been some criticism that some models are actually good at performing well on the benchmarks, but maybe that's actually not necessarily a good way to actually measure, are we actually making progress, right, in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, there's this thing that happened with, statistics in general, where people were sort of just trying all the models before they were actually implemented. And I think that's going to happen over time as well. Yeah. Just try them all. It's, that price is going to drop over time. So you can just sort of like try it all, actually figure out what works for your data, and then implement after that.
That's amazing. I want to switch topics a little bit and maybe go back to your career. And I think something that's really unique from your background is that you've worked across big and small companies, both in a very entrepreneurial setting, being a junior partner at this software consultancy, to now, a very, very big multinational company. And I'm just curious, now with a lot of these AI tools, like if I'm a young engineer and I'm thinking about my career growth and progression, how should I think about it? Like, what should I invest in? and what should I do in terms of the fundamental driving principles on how I can achieve career growth?
Yeah, well, certainly, if you have an opportunity to like invest in yourself first, right? I mean, you know, that's not going to change in the equation, all right? So you should certainly invest in yourself, and that means going and to get the training that you need, taking opportunities to join communities, to learn from others, right? Get that sort of like diversity of thought as well, and constantly improve yourself. The other side of that is, if you are, because then comes the question, well, what should I get certified in, or what is it I should learn? You're going to have to understand the landscape of technology, what's happened before, and where you think things are heading. And you're going to have to take a bet. And if you're going to take a bet while you're young, the downside isn't very low. You can always switch. You can always learn something new, and there are always fungible skills that you have learned in whatever it is you chose that you can take someplace else, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're bringing diversity now back to the other side of the technology equation, right? So you made a bet on a particular technology, and that didn't work out, but you can take those skills and move it to the new technology.
Are there certain skills that you think are more and more important in this era of Gen AI? And maybe when you're hiring engineers specifically, like what do you look for actually?
So for me, it's certainly the capability to learn and relearn. If I am looking to hire somebody and evaluating them, I want to make sure that they don't have a fixed mindset, right? Make sure that they really have this growth mindset of, instead of like, I don't know that, it's like, I don't know that yet, right? And have this capability then to sort of like go and learn it, and we'll go and do the work in order to learn it. A friend of mine, so whenever we were interviewing at Google has a very strict set of questions that you ask. But one of my friends said, a question I always want to ask, but what wasn't part of the Google set of questions was, what did you do to prepare for this interview?
Oh.
Right? Because that's such a great question, right? Because it really gives you an opportunity to sort of see how they think for themselves. Where do they go and get data? How do they do the research? How do they figure out what's important? How do they figure out the value that they can bring to the organization? And how do they bring that into the conversation? So, and I think that even if, an interview doesn't ask you that question, you should always think about that question, right? Which is, what did I do to prepare for this interview? What did I do to prepare for this meeting? What did I do to prepare for this project? Because that, I think, is going to really get you out of the mindset of requiring somebody to give you instructions and telling you what to learn, which is, again, great in the early part of your career. But as you progress, they're not going to do that work for you, and you're going to have to do that work yourself. And another thing I'll sort of bring into this conversation is, it's always better to ask the right question than to have the right answer. It's always more valuable. Because asking the right question, gets you closer to like the root of the problem.
Wow, that's a great way to think about it. I think on their earlier point, people say that AI is a great age for people who have agency. And I think part of that mindset of knowing how you prepare for certain things or having a thesis or opinion on where things will go, combined with maybe the leverage that some of these AI tools or how fast the industry is moving will give you, will actually help you contribute to your success as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm also curious, maybe for you did an MBA, which is also a very, very unique path, right? Or detour, right?
Yeah.
And how do you think about that? Like, is that valuable for most engineers or, yeah?
So the way I thought about it was really, I was a junior partner at this company, right? And as I said, we got acquired. And I, at that point, was really sort of thinking about, what I wanted to do next. And, like all people, you sort of like look back and you have certain regrets. So I never finished my undergrad. And I really wish that I had done that. And so I was thinking about, maybe I'll just go back and finish my undergrad. And then I spoke with, one of my friends, and she's super smart, and I respect everything she has to say. And she says, well, why do your undergrad? Why don't you just go back and get a master's? I'm like, can I do that? Because I didn't finish my undergrad. I don't think you can do that. And she goes, why don't you have you asked anybody? Have you asked like somebody in a master's program whether you can do that? And I was like, no, I haven't. And so she had done an MBA at University of Chicago. She referred me to University of Chicago, and I said, I haven't done my undergrad. Can I go straight for an MBA? And they're like, yeah, you can do that. It's like, why don't you just take your GMAT? We'll see how you score, and then if you score well, we'll put you into the program. So certainly the undergrad is important if you don't have any work experience, but I also think the work experience also feeds into that, because I also had to write an essay.
Right.
I had to write an essay talking about my career since I left my undergrad and what it's been like, and what I've achieved and what I wish I would have achieved.
Yeah.
And I had to submit that as well. So I had to submit that, and I had to take my GMAT and went to the MBA program. So why an MBA? Why didn't I choose to get a master's in something else?
Yeah.
So for me, it was really about being able to understand and talk the language of business. So it has really helped me, certainly from a networking standpoint as well. And MBAs obviously give you access to great, smart people and give you access to networks. But it also helps you sort of go back and reconceptualize, what it means to create value in an organization. What is the value of you as a manager or as a networker to the organization? How do I talk about technology with a CIO or CTO or CFO or CEO? What is it that they care about? What's important to them? And it's really paid off for me, certainly. I remember coming out of a conversation in my early days of Google, where I was helping to talk to a large international conglomerate, and one of the people came up to me afterwards, and she goes, so "What's your role again?" And at the time, I was one of the what they call customer engineers, a customer engineering manager, and I was like, "Oh, I'm a customer engineering manager." And she said to me, "You don't talk like an engineer," which I took as a compliment. Because I knew who my audience was, right? And I was really trying to tailor my message for that particular audience. And one of the things that you'll learn as you sort of become a leader and become get to that executive level and start talking to these CXOs is, they're fine talking to engineers, but what you'll find is that they will tend to direct you to who you sound like.
I see.
Right, so if I'm talking to a CXO and I'm talking just around technology and how I do, CI/CD and configure Kubernetes, they're going to say, "Oh, this is really great, but I know exactly who you should talk to. Why don't you go talk to my lead developer?" But lead developer certainly has influence when it comes to technology decisions, but they are not the final decision maker. Right, so you really do need to think about who the audience is and who you're talking to. And for me, the MBA has really given me access to that, as well as other things. It's certainly helped me understand, my value to the company, how my OKRs and KPIs feed into the overall stock price. Obviously, it's helped me with things like my own personal investments, in terms of when I should hold my stock and when I should sell it. But it's really been valuable, mostly just because I know what these different CXOs care about, and I can give them the tools in order to go sell that to their board.
Do you think there's other ways that you could have developed that, or maybe for those developers out there who are thinking about it, but they also don't want to invest 2 years of time and effort? What are the ways that they could actually?
Yeah, absolutely. I have lots of friends who didn't do an MBA, but they certainly know more about business than I ever will, and that's from running their own business. Certainly, you can go and be an entrepreneur, run a startup, and learn all of these things. Absolutely, and there are certainly groups of people that will help you do that. If you take a look at, VC investors and leaders, they go in and they teach the founders, what this means and how to talk about their products and how to increase their valuation and what that means. So there are certainly other ways to learn that.
That's great. I think for the last section, what we like to do is a bit of rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
So feel free to say whatever comes to your mind, and we'll start from there. So the first question is, what's your favorite tech tool or AI tool that you've been using recently?
Yeah, so I have access to a number of different AI tools. Because I'm an ex-Googler, I have a lot of Google storage, and so I do have the Gemini plan, and I've been playing with that Gemini as well as their experimental features, and I've found that really interesting. And of course, I also have ChatGPT as well, and play with that, and it's interesting as well. Just compare how the different models work, and also I'm really interested in sort of how Google has an experimental feature right now where it can actually use your chat history or not chat history, it'll use your browser history in order to incorporate that to give you better answers, which I guess can also be scary.
Yeah.
But it does depend. Like, do you think there's value there? And it's certainly interesting from that standpoint. There are other tools that I would like to try, which I haven't. So I'd like to try some of the vibe flow coding tools.
Yes.
Right. And I'm definitely going to experiment that. I was thinking about like doing that over the next couple of weeks, actually, sort of seeing, what kind of application I can have AI generate for me.
That's amazing. Second question is, if you're not doing what you're doing now, maybe as a developer, like how do you think you'd be spending your time?
So I probably wouldn't be doing anything technology related. I would probably be doing acting. So I actually act on the side.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've done a couple of commercials, and I had been doing a lot of musical theater as well, but because of my travel schedule, I haven't been able to do that this year.
Wow. And this is in like plays or in theaters?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's
Exactly.
incredible.
Plays in theaters and then some commercials on film. Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. Third question is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually, so one of my colleagues, posted some things like on sort of like things that she had learned from leaders, and I actually did I posted on her LinkedIn post, but I did do a bit of a mental exercise thinking about that, and there are a few things actually. One of the first things I learned was from a previous manager and mentor named Robert Hillard out of Australia. And he said it's always better to make a decision than wait, right? Because waiting implies sort of waiting is also a decision. Number one, right? You're saying that the status quo is okay.
Yeah.
But if you already know that the status quo is not okay, then just make a decision. There are very few things that can't be undone.
Yeah.
And it's better to act. And if you do make a mistake, then you'll learn something.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something I've definitely taken on. The one of the other ones is from a guy named Martin Kearns, who was a colleague of mine. So he's very very influential in the agile development community in Australia. And one of the things that I loved that he always did was, if his team was arguing and pointing fingers after something went wrong, he would just say, "It's my fault. Now let's move on." And I think that's something that a great leader does, right? They'll remove that from the equation so that you can get back to solving the problem. It's my fault. Okay, great. Now what's next?
Wow. On the first one, I think Jeff Bezos has this concept of a one-way door or two-way door, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if it's a one-way door, maybe be more careful. But if it's two ways, then just make the decision because you can always come back, right? That's great. Next one is, I wonder if you have any very contrarian beliefs, which is maybe a belief that society thinks is obvious, but maybe you think is not so true.
All right. That's a really good question. I think that there are certainly a lot of topics which it's interesting because I've been reading sort of a lot about people who moralize preferences, right? Which you'll take something that you believe to be true and you'll turn it into a moral, even though it's not necessarily moral. It's just like a preference in terms of how you approach something. So it's something like DEI could be considered like that, right? So maybe there's a preference for doing things, but let's not try to tag like a morality against that. So after COVID, a lot of people have ended up working from home, and a lot of people really enjoy working from home. And a lot of people have very strong feelings around working from home versus going to the office, right? So in general, like a lot of executives say everybody needs to work from office because we need to be collaborative. And a lot of people are like, I get a lot more done at home because I can focus. But, I personally believe like both can be true in certain situations. So if I have something that I need to do where I need to focus, let's say I need to put together a presentation about a particular topic, it definitely makes sense for me to stay home, focus on that, not get distracted by anything else, and get that done. But if I need to be innovative and creative, so earlier I was talking about diversity of ideas. If I'm sitting at home, I have no diversity of ideas. It's really just me trying to think of things in a vacuum. But what you should do is you should go into an office or work with other people in order to get different ideas and to workshop things. And some might think, well, I can do that via video conferencing. Well, I don't think that's true at all. Some of the most valuable conversations I've ever had are the conversations I have before a meeting starts, when everybody's waiting for someone to arrive, or in the hallway afterwards, because it wasn't something I needed to bring up with everybody in the meeting, but I wanted to talk to a specific individual in that meeting afterwards. And what I find with video conferencing is, you pretty much just stick to the agenda. Everybody wants the meetings to end. A 15-minute meeting turns into a half-hour meeting because that's what you just put in the calendar. And you want to utilize all of that time. So I think for me, and this comes back to, the Google Office design that I worked on is, before you start work, before you do work, you should think about the environment that's required in order to accomplish that work, that particular task. And your tasks will change every day. If I'm a developer, perhaps I'm just like coding on a particular task. But if I need to solve something new, I can choose to do it myself, but I also have to realize that all of us in a group are smarter than any one of us, and we all bring different perspectives and experience. And if I am not taking advantage of that experience, then I might not be creating the best application even. Right? So you really do need to think about, what it is I need to accomplish, and leaders need to think about this as well, because you should give them flexibility. So you should say, great, work from home on that because that makes sense. But on this particular creative task or this particular problem-solving task, we need to bring people together. And we need to make sure that we have the environment that's required in order to accomplish the task, not just sort of say that one is right or the other one is right. It's not turn to office versus work from home. It's I need to accomplish this task. Where can I do this best?
I'm just curious, given that, how do you balance the flexibility of maybe being in a hybrid environment with this concept of serendipity? Because I heard once this like TED talk about Google where even in the cafeterias they designed the chairs to be and the tables to be close enough where people would bump into each other, right? After they get lunch, or even the design of the hallways and these kind of things, where a lot of these spontaneous conversations encourage this kind of like cross-team collaboration, right? But in the sense where if you only allow people to come in or only mandate people to come in because of, let's say, creative brainstorming on certain days of the week, maybe you lose that kind of magic, right?
Yeah, you do. Absolutely. And I think that's what a lot of organizations are struggling with, right? They're trying to enforce this RTO policy, this, return to office policy in order to create that. But they need to think about sort of like other reasons, right? So they need to like create the culture that allows people to come into the office. So Akamai is actually a work from home first company. So, there's no requirement for people to go into the office. Offices are provided, but in general, if it works best for you to work from home. If you have family obligations, it makes it easier, great. You certainly get additional diversity in the team because you have a lot of people that do have children to take care of, and if you can encourage them to stay working while they're also taking care of the kids, great, or they're taking care of a parent, whatever it is, it gives additional flexibility, and therefore you are introducing some diversity of thought and background into the conversation. But on the serendipity side, it's certainly something that technology hasn't solved for yet. Video conferencing hasn't solved for. You do see some experimentation, right, around VR and virtual meetings as well. I don't think that's really been solved either. And it is really difficult. I do think that it's important not just to have this sort of like task-oriented gathering. You need to have other types of gatherings to sort of create that serendipity, and that's through and this isn't something you can mandate or you should mandate, but some sort of gathering where people can come in that's not necessarily work related, but allows them to build trust and relationships among the team. Trust is extremely important for team collaboration, and being able to do that's really important. I mean, I just had an offsite recently where I met a few people for the first time in person, and being able to meet them, understand not just what they do, but who they are, has a huge impact on my capability to just reach out to them now and say, hey, I know you're working on this. By the way, how's your family? Or you're doing this. Being able to have that trust and that safety allows you to take those interpersonal risks, right? Allows you to have the psychological safety to go and take risks inside the organization, and therefore push the boundaries of what we might do and have those more serendipitous conversations. So yeah, it is hard. It's hard to balance that.
And for you guys, so there's offsites, but are there any other mechanisms by which you found were effective or helpful in facilitating some of these connections?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly the culture plays a big part in that as well, right? It's like knowing somebody went to the same school as you growing up. There's this common understanding and common background. So if you have this culture and everybody understands what that culture is, it helps establish that really well. Google is obviously very good at this. At Akamai, it's much more of it comes from an MIT background, so it's much more this sort of curiosity-driven culture, which is also great, right? Because whenever I first joined Akamai, everybody was very interested in my outside opinion. Oh, you're just coming in. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So if you can establish that early on, it helps that those serendipitous conversations happen much more quickly and easily.
And I think the last question that I want to ask is, for what are you most grateful for in life?
What am I most grateful for? I am most grateful for, I think it would be obviously my children, but let's go beyond that a little bit.
Yeah.
I am most grateful for the opportunities that I have had just to meet great people. There are great leaders that I've had an opportunity to work with, great customers I've had an opportunity to work with, great colleagues I've had an opportunity to work with, great people who've reported into me that I've had an opportunity to learn from. And I appreciate that level of human interaction. I am someone who does believe that all of us are smarter than any one of us, and the ability to interact with people has helped me grow as a person immensely.
Awesome. Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy, and thank you so much for coming in and sharing some of your insights. For those of the viewers who are interested in learning more about Akamai or even about you, where can they find you?
So I have all of my stuff posted on j.social. So I have links to all of my accounts, as well as some things that I'm working on right now. And if you want to learn more about Akamai, you can go to www.akamai.com.
Awesome. And we'll definitely link everything in the show notes as well. Jay, thank you so much. Really inspiring career, just because of all the diverse things that you've been doing, and also the detour into the MBA and a lot of these really interesting insights about the future of cloud computing as well. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you guys come back for the next episode soon. Bye.